Hello and happy Friday. Alex Cox again, back live on another Friday afternoon. And as usual, we will give it a few moments to let people join. We've been doing these at a slightly different time to normal, so we don't clash with the Prime Minister's COVID-19 updates in the UK. Um, so for the foreseeable future, 4 p.m. will be the new time we do these. Great. So I can see people tuning in. I think we've got about 7 people watching, jumped up to 12. I will give it another 30 seconds, even though I was late starting, um, just to let people join. But if you are watching, say hello. I can see we've got, hey William, nice and prompt as always. Very good to see you. Hope you're well. Great. Well, we're steadily climbing anyway, so we will get started, I guess. Yeah, happy Friday. Welcome to. Hi, Denise. Hello. I can see all the comments coming through now, so I'll just take a look at those first. Hi, Jackie from Sunny Hove. Yeah, I mean, it almost seems a bit cruel that some of the best weather we've had all year has started just as we've all started to become stuck indoors. Yeah, no, I'm not too bad. Starting to get a little bit bored, I think. Which is why I'm trying my best to put my mind to more productive activities, some of which I thought I would share today. Um, there are loads of family history projects or family history related things that you can do to fill your time. Some of which had actually been on my list for quite a long time, but not everyday life just got in the way. But now that we all find ourselves having more time on our hands, it's a great opportunity. Hello, Linda. Hello, Karen in Enfield. Hello, Julie. Hello everybody. Great. So yeah, we were up to a good amount of viewers now. We will get started. Well, happy Friday. Week 2 of self-isolation live broadcast. As you can probably see, I'm in a different section of my flat today because my wife is in the room I was in last week on a meeting that has overrun, a video meeting. So I thought rather than disturb her, I'd secrete myself quite. I can't. I mean, my guitar's in the other room. Maybe next week. That's my excuse anyway. But yeah, no, it's great to be back. It's great to see you all. As we said last week, during this time, I think it's more important than ever than we stay connected, we stay talking to each other, and we help each other keep busy, and we support those who need it. And one of the great things about modern technology is that there are so many incredible ways to do that now. And one of the things we touched on last week, if you didn't tune in, is that we've just started our own brand new kind of scheme of online activities that we'll be doing every day on our Facebook page. We want to get live. Thank you, Rosie. I'm quite fond of them too. We want to get everybody talking to each other. One of the things that we do really like seeing is you guys, a lot of you are very knowledgeable, helping out beginners who are just getting started. I think now is a time that lots of people are going to be starting their family history journeys for the first time. As I was saying before about activities, I think it's for many people it's something they've had on their to-do list. Everyday life gets in the way, and now is a family history is something you can do from anywhere with internet access. Basically, allows you to travel through time from the comfort of your own sofa and personalize the past by finding out how your family fitted into the kind of wider events of history. Um, so yeah, I think we will see more people getting started, more fledgling researchers dipping their toes into the family history pool. That's probably enough metaphors for today. But one of the things my plea to you guys is that if you do see anybody coming in and asking a question, looking to get started, help them out. I know you do it already, and I love to see it, but I just wanted to remind you of all of that. And likewise, to anyone watching, if you are tuning in for the first time and you've never seen these before, we do them every single Friday. It's an opportunity for me to tell you what's going on behind the scenes, what we're working on. I'm a big social history fan, so I like to discuss a few topics of interest to me this week as well. But yeah, one of the big reasons is so you guys can all communicate with each other as well as us, and help each other on your brick walls, your research struggles. Hi Sylvia, hi Karen. I'm trying to support apprentices remotely. So a few people actually said working remotely makes makes me realise that makes me feel like they had less time than them when they were going into the office. Hello Nicole. Hello Dave. Oh, great to see you. I hope you're well, Dave. I think we last saw each other at Roots Tech. And Sylvia beat me to it on question of the week. So on the subject of discussion, we'd like to start these every single week with a question of the week, just to get the ball rolling, get the comments coming in, just get you thinking about the same topic. And as the nation is facing, well, the world is facing somewhat trying times at the moment. Something pretty unprecedented, certainly in British history. You know, we've never faced the kind of restrictions that we currently find ourselves under, and they're there for good reason. Um, but history is cyclical, things repeat. We are not the first generation to face struggles. We're the first generation to face this unique struggle, but our countless ancestors before us would have faced their own unique, difficult situations and overcame them in a variety of different ways. So, this week's question of the week is, what has your research revealed about the struggles your ancestors faced? And what I should have added is, and how did, if they did, how did they overcome them? So Sylvia, one of my pals, who was also as illustrated in her comment, does a lot of fascinating work around the history of vaccination records and vaccination in general. He said, not my ancestor, but I researched the family history of one of the famous anti-vaxxers whose son died during the Spanish flu epidemic and blogged about it a few weeks ago. And you very kindly shared the link. I will definitely be reading that myself. I'm a big fan of Sylvia's work, and I would recommend it to everybody else. Sylvia, hi from sunny Sussex, Leslie. Hope you're well. Hi, Maureen from Crewe. I know Crewe well. It's not that far from where I grew up. Sunny in West Yorkshire. Oh, and overcast in Aberdeenshire for Cindy. Well, at least you're stuck indoors. um, Tess Martin saying, hi there, thanks for doing these videos. I wonder if there's any way to export reports from one individual in your tree to produce a small packet that could easily be shared with others. Ideally, it would include some source documents. I know there are other softwares that do this, but I've found their design lacking. I'm sure an FMP version of this service would be much better designed. Thank you. Well, that's very kind of you to say. And actually, that's something I think we are looking into. And again, one of the other great things about these videos is we any recommendations you come up with, I do feed straight back to our product and engineering teams, the tech guys, the clever folk who actually build the website and keep it running. Um, but actually, on that subject, one of the activities that you could do while you are stuck indoors is kind of related to that. So I'll come to that in a minute. Julie saying, sorry I missed the live sessions as I'm watching the virus news briefings at this time each day, but I will watch the video. Struggling to focus on family history at this time, but we'll try. Keep well, Erich and team. And to you, Julie, too. And Nicole said, I've found a few ancestors had been in the workhouse and a few died, even though they still had family around the time they had died. It's very sad indeed, but and quite common in many of our family trees. And Anya saying, would we have seen this same lockdown if the Spanish flu broke out in peacetime? It seems they tried to keep it as quiet as possible in the press here, so the enemy didn't think that was a weakness. Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, that is why it is known as the Spanish flu. Spain, obviously neutral during the First World War, didn't field soldiers, didn't side with any of the major powers. So they were free to report about the virus, the Spanish flu. Sorry, not the virus. They were free to report about the pandemic in a way that other countries weren't, with wartime restrictions put on the press. And to this day, that is why it's known as the Spanish flu, because they were discussing it openly, and it was originally seen as a Spanish problem, but it wasn't. It was very, very global. That's a really good question, actually. I do wonder that myself. Do you know what? I don't think they would have been physically able to. I mean, you see, even a lot of the restrictions that were put in place in the Second World War, they had a hard time enforcing them. And one of the things I'm going to talk about today is the historical parallels between certain things that are happening now and that have happened throughout history. So I'll touch on that in a bit. I love it when I see comments that feed into what I've got planned already. um, uh, and Sylvia's saying, quite possibly they're in the workhouse and firm. I'm replying to another comment, I think, there. Well, I guess on. Oh, thank you, Brenda. That's very kind of you. I think from my research, probably the main struggles I've found in my ancestors, I haven't actually found any workhouse ancestors yet. I also haven't found any evidence of criminality, which I'm a bit disappointed about. I found victims of crime, but I haven't found any perpetrators. But yeah, I think all the main ones I found have generally been military based. Um, as many people with British ancestors, pretty much all my male ancestors of that generation fought in France during the First World War. All of them did make it home, but none of them came out unscathed. And my great grandfather, in particular, who only died in 1999, was terribly shell shocked. And I don't remember him that well because he died when I was about 11, and he was very old. He was nearing 100 when I knew him. But according to family stories, he did have quite a number of eccentricities and odd behaviours that they all definitely attributed to his experiences during the First World War. I mean, I'm lucky that his service record was one of the 40% that survived largely intact. And seeing the medical pages, I mean, he was shot twice and gassed once, and each time he was sent back after being sent home to recover. So no wonder it impacted um, his mindset, I guess. Five Family History Society. Lovely to see you guys tuning in. Thank you very much, Chris Dyer. How do I turn you off? Very easy. There should be a small X in the top right corner of the screen. Click that, and I will disappear forever. Pat Roberts, I recently attended your Dundee office for market research into a new app being developed. When will it be available? Thank you very much for taking part in that, Pat. But that is information that I'm not actually party to quite yet. I'm sure when we have something to share, we will share it. Anyway, I haven't even said what we're talking about today. So yeah, I wanted to have a look at some recent anniversaries because we're approaching VE Day. VE Day is not very far off. So that means 75 years ago, around this time, the war in Europe was drawing to a close. So there were some pretty major events happening then. I also wanted to have another look at some of the celeb research we did for Loose Women. We'll save that to the end, seeing how we get on for time. As I said, some activities to perhaps keep you busy, and as I also mentioned earlier, some interesting historical parallels to what is currently going on. Oh, hi Margaret, very glad you're here. Yeah, we are doing the we are doing different times at the moment. So I just look at the comments. Oh wow, Audrey Dempsey. I found my two times great grandmother and aunt robbed from the post office. Her husband ran and they ended up in prison. Well, I guess that is an example of struggle. They probably committed the theft because they were in dire need of some money. And that was their way of trying to overcome it. Unfortunately, it sounds like it led to further struggles. But that is a fantastic story. I'm assuming you found that in a combination of newspaper and crime records. Overlap between those two is great. But anyway, before I dive in very, very quickly to the things on my list to discuss, just wanted to remind you all that, of course, today is Friday, which means we have brand new records. We release them every single Friday. And this week is a very good week if your ancestors were north of the border, up in Scotland. We've been adding loads of Scottish records. We love Scottish records, trying to fill as many gaps as we possibly can. I've really enjoyed seeing them all come onto the site and helping push them out. And this week is no different. So we've got a valuation roll from 1874 from Kilmarnock in Ayrshire. Um, Very good census substitute. You'll get things like landlords and tenants' names. You'll get their addresses. You'll get descriptions of the property, how much rent was paid. I mean, this is only for 1874, so it's a great way of finding your ancestor kind of between the 1871 and 1881 census. Um, but Scottish valuation rolls in general seem to stretch from about 1855 up to 1996. There's quite a nice continual record of them there, and I'm not quite sure how many we have on our site. But next up we've got another set of records from Kilmarnock. This is ratepayers 1838 to 1846. You put rate paying records, tax payment records, tied to property rates, obviously property rates. Another great census substitute, and third up we have another good census substitute for Kilmarnock. So when I say Scotland, I should probably be a bit more specific and say great week if you've got Kilmarnock ancestors. So these are voter lists from 1837 to 1852, and these are quite cool actually, because as well as giving you the kind of information you'd get on a census return, things like names, occupations, addresses, you also get who the candidate your ancestor voted for. So that's kind of like a rare snapshot into their political views, I guess, and also lists of those who didn't vote as well. Because at the time these records were taken, the right to vote in Scotland was not universal at all. Only owners or tenants of residences worth more than £10, I believe it was, actually had the right to vote, and that was only if they'd paid all their taxes for the previous year. Um, but one thing I would do with all these Kilmarnock records, if you are searching them, is cross-reference them with our Scottish Census records. It'll help you find out more, and it might give you some good little names and dates to narrow down your search. We've also added a load of new newspapers and a brand new title this week, which will be very good for for Maureen Larkin watching Sunny Crew, because it is the Crew Chronicle, spanning the years 1874 to 1972, as well as loads of new additions to existing papers. If you want to get a better idea of exactly what it is we've added, head over to the What's New section of our blog, where you will find a more detailed list, and it will tell you everything that's in there. It'll take you straight through to the search pages. Brilliant, right, so that's records out of the way. I'll take a quick look at comments. From Anya saying, question of the week, definitely reading the accounts of the 1842 children's. Oh, this is good. Yeah, if you haven't read this before, read it. You always come up with great suggestions. The 1842 Children's Commission into Mine Works they really were horrific. Yeah, that's not an understatement. Reading the story of two brothers in East Lothian, the younger kept trying to run away. Oof, the elder mentioned two of their sisters crushed by a rock fall in the mine. They didn't seem to die instantly. The sisters were 8 and 17. Their oldest sister in the family married into my family. Wow, that's a fantastic discovery, albeit a rather sad one. And Cheryl Sanderson, another one of our regular viewers, has said, my ancestors struggled to return to some sort of normality after the war, finding provisions, somewhere to live, as so many homes had been bombed, children coming home after months or perhaps years, living with other families, coping with so many losses, sad times, but strong, determined Yorkshire folk. Yeah, my grandfather, who served in the Royal Navy during the Second World War, he was a Lancashire man, not Yorkshire. I'm sure they would have had some banter if the two families had known each other. But yeah, he had a similar one. So after he fought in Europe, he was sent over to the Far East, where he was actually part of the planned invasion fleet for Japan before they dropped the atomic bombs. And after that, he went to Ceylon, what was then known as Ceylon, until about 19. I don't think he got back to Lancashire until 1946. And when he got home, he sadly discovered that his father had died. He didn't know until he got home, so that was a similar shock for him. And also, he found out that his best mate in school, who he sat next to, was killed in a bombing raid over Germany. But yeah, lots of stories. But I think also trying to make it positive as well. The resilience shown by people back then is definitely something we should try and emulate. And I'm seeing loads of examples of it at the moment. I'm sure many of you got involved in the wonderful show of appreciation for the NHS last night. I stuck my head out the window and gave them a clap. But yeah, it was really quite emotional seeing everybody. I mean, where I am in Twickenham, you could hear cries all over the place. It was quite a special moment. I think that's something I will remember for quite some time. Anyway, right. So first up, I wanted to just quite tell you about some interesting anniversaries that I thought have happened this month. Ones that I had missed. Two that are actually quite tied. So this week, actually, Sunday marks the quite a nice happy anniversary, the 75th anniversary of the very last V1 flying bomb attack on Britain. But it's more significant than that, because that actually marks the last enemy action of any kind on British soil. 29th of March 1945. See what I said about we're coming up to V-Day, so things were starting to wind down for the Allies in Europe, not so much in the Far East. But yeah, so this Sunday is the 75th anniversary of the very, 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 very last enemy action of any kind to take place on British soil. And that was when a V1 bomb struck down in Datchworth in Hertfordshire. Thankfully, it didn't result in any casualties. It was a miss. I mean, accuracy with those flying bombs was a problem that the Germans always struggled to overcome, I believe. But similarly, so yeah, this Sunday is the 75th anniversary of the last enemy action of any kind on British soil. But earlier in the month, was an anniversary which I think passed everybody by. It's an anniversary which I didn't realise, but I think it's one that we should commemorate. And it's the 80th anniversary of the first civilian casualty on British soil during the Second World War. So somewhat sad story, but fascinating one nonetheless. So on the 16th of March 1940, a young man named by the name of James Ibister became the first civilian casualty on British soil of the Second World War when he was tragically killed by a string of high explosive incendiary devices that tore through a kind of neat cluster of cottages in the parish of Stennes, um, when a load of Heinkel bombers were basically trying to attack warships that were anchored off Scapa Flow. Stennes was off the island of Orkney, and I was quite surprised to learn the first civilian casualty happened somewhere as remote and usually peaceful as Orkney. But there I was wrong. So this is a very little remembered tragedy. And I had a little look in our newspapers and I had a little look into our records to see what I could discover about James Ibster, his life, his legacy. And I found out quite a lot. James was a family man. He had a little baby called Neil. um, but one of the things that really struck me about this was that James was a prime example of people pulling together and doing the right thing and showing courage in moments of adversity. Because James was actually killed when he was running to the assistance of his elderly neighbour, a lady called Mrs. Isabella MacLeod. So a bomb hit the house that was opposite to his and virtually completely destroyed her house. And instantly, without thinking, James jumped to his feet, sprinted out the front door, but sadly, just as he got out the front door, he was hit by a hail of shrapnel, by more bombs falling in the street, and collapsed just a few feet away from his own front door. The attack was over in pretty much a minute, and although others were injured, including Mrs. MacLeod, who did survive and was able to climb out the shattered remains of her house, James Ibster was the only fatality. And it's quite fascinating reading the newspaper reports because you realise how surprising it was to the residents of Orkney. Something like this had not been witnessed before. Of course, there was some very limited air raids during the First World War, but nothing on the scale of what was actually to come. And the paper describes how even though people had been given air raid warnings, there were air raid warnings, these were completely ignored by people because they didn't realise how serious the situation was. People crowded into the streets to watch the attack because they could see it happening over their houses. They could see the Heinkels bombing the ships, and they could see the shore batteries near the flow firing back, and it would have been an amazing kind of pyrotechnic display to witness in the dark night, I guess. But the local paper, the Orcadian, which actually is in our newspaper archive, summed it up pretty perfectly when it was critical of the people who, very similar to the press today. The press today is being very rightly so, very critical of the people who are ignoring the warnings that are being issued by the government and the police and that kind of thing. But the situation was no different in 1940. The local paper Orkney basically said it admitted that the Brigger Waste tragedy, as it was called, everyone had shocked everyone. It said, war. Any people here in Orkney Islands who were unimaginative enough to believe it would never happen here are now disillusioned. Um, so yeah, those were the anniversaries I very quickly wanted to tell you about. Oh no, there was another one as well. Another one that I found very interesting, which is a real case of history being written by the victors. So sorry, I'm just getting messages from colleagues about something completely unrelated. Stop distracting me. So yeah, the 10th of March. This was another anniversary that passed me by. It was the 75th. I think we've all been a bit distracted lately, haven't we? It was the 75th anniversary of the German equivalent of the Great Escape. That is when 67 German prisoners of war successfully tunneled their way out of a place called Island Farm Camp 198 at Bridgend. And that was the biggest escape by German POs during the Second World War. And it's quite interesting looking at the newspaper coverage of this at the time because you really don't get the full picture. So very little bit about the farm. So Island Farm wasn't actually originally built as a POW camp. It was built as a hostel for female workers. Again, another example of the country pulling together during the war. Everyone volunteering. Sorry, I'm going to close my messenger because I'm getting very distracting pop-ups on my screen. Um, That's what I'm saying. Yes, it was built to house female workers who were employed in a very big munitions factory at Bridgend. But the women themselves found the conditions so dreary that they actually just commuted. Some of them travelling as far as 30 miles to get there. That's how much they did not like this accommodation. And considering it went on to become a prisoner of war camp, I think they may have had a point. So the camp basically remained completely unoccupied until 1943. And then it was used to accommodate all the American GIs who were being stationed in Britain to prepare for the Allied invasion of France. And then obviously, once they embarked, it was empty again. But I think even the Allies' progress in France shocked them at some stages, and they were taking huge numbers of POWs. It wasn't like the war in on the Eastern Front, where you know German soldiers would be very reluctant to surrender to Soviet forces. I think many German soldiers knew that if you surrendered to the Brits or the Americans, you were generally going to be treated pretty well. Um, and I'm sure some of them probably realised that the invasion of France was the beginning of the end for Germany, despite all the propaganda they were being fed. But yeah, so it was repurposed to house these huge amounts of prisoners that they were bringing back to England as they were marching their way through France. It could hold about 2,000 prisoners, and the first that got there were a mix of Italians and Germans. But the War Office, when they investigated the place, took a completely different view to the munitions workers who thought it was too dreary to stay there. They actually felt that it was a little bit too cushy, and this was too good for enlisted soldiers, and this was more suited to officers. So from November 1944, they started replacing the enlisted prisoners with quite senior ranking German officers. Some of the escapees actually were quite, you had quite a few field marshals in there. But anyway, so what happened with the escape? So pretty much as soon as they got there, the officers began planning escape efforts. They were no different to their British counterparts in that sense. So and it's quite funny because their plan mirrored very closely the method that was used by the British soldiers, famously depicted in The Great Escape. So they dug two tunnels. The first was discovered in January 1945, but the second completely escaped detection. Sorry. And on the 10th of March 1945, 70 of them were able to get through this tunnel, which was dug from Hut 9, which if you can go visit there now, and Hut 9 is the only hut left still standing. And it was about 30 feet, about 9.1 meters long, if you prefer it in meters, and came out just the other side of the perimeter fence. But they were very ingenious in the way they did this. So excavating the tunnels, like in the Great Escape, was not easy, but the soil was very kind of heavy clay type soil, and that meant they had a very hard time digging it out. And they used cans, meat tins, and sometimes even knives that they pinched from the canteen. And they would haul all the soil out of this makeshift tunnel, put it into kit bags. Sometimes they'd carry it in their pockets, just as you see in The Great Escape, and kind of trail it along behind them as they're walking along. That was a very famous scene in the film. Others would knead the really hard clay into little balls, and they drop them through a little hole in a false wall they constructed in one of the huts. So really clever stuff. And they'd used oak benches, which were stolen from the canteen, and bed legs to create the struts and supports to keep the tunnel from caving in on top of them. Um, and I love this bit. They used ventilation. They made ventilation pipelines out of condensed milk tins, and had hand-operated fans to keep it going. And the tunnel even actually had its own electric lights, which they tapped from the main supply. Very cheeky. And to conceal the noise of digging, they would sing Bavarian chorus songs. So anyway, down to the escape, they would divide themselves into groups. Each was equipped with a map, a homemade compass, small amount of food. They'd also forged identity papers that they'd produced themselves in the camp. It's so weird, isn't it? This mirrors almost identically what happened in The Great Escape. And for security purposes, each escaper's identity was only known to the others in his small group. So not everyone in the camp was allotted a slot to escape, and no one knew if the person they were talking if that person wasn't in their group, they'd have no idea whether or not that person was also going to escape. And this basically protected them from betrayal, and probably was one of the reasons that the whole scheme was never uncovered. So at around 10 p.m. on the night of March the 10th, they made their move. A few stole the local doctor's car and actually made it as far as Birmingham, which is 120 miles away from the camp. So did pretty well. The other group made it all the way to the port of Southampton. So they were very close to making it across the Channel. Um, and yeah, some of them followed railway lines as well. So basically, that's how they did it. But one of the interesting things is that it's actually some historians have actually claimed that 84 prisoners got out, which would eclipse the 76 Allied prisoners who made it out of Stalag Luft 3. Um, but 14 were captured almost immediately afterwards, and for propaganda purposes, the officials removed them from the count and said that only 70 had escaped, which is why most people probably aren't aware that the German Great Escape was actually a little bit larger than the British Great Escape. They were all eventually recaptured, but again, this has been disputed. Some historians say that was propaganda, and that 3 escapees who were later spotted in Kent were never actually tracked down. But that is just one of those mysteries that has been lost to time. Who knows? Maybe someone will find out whether that's true or not one day. But yeah, it was a bit of an embarrassment. So only 3 weeks after the escape, on 31st of March, the authorities suddenly transferred all of the officers off the farm. Um, and in all there were about 160 of all the prisoners they moved over. About 160 were holding the rank of general, admiral, or field marshal, including quite a good number of some of Hitler's really closest advisors. So as I said, these were top tier German prisoners. So amongst them you had Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who was the commander in chief of the German armies in the campaign against France. He was probably the highest status prisoner at the camp, and he got certain privileges, like he had his own suite with a sitting room and a bedroom. Pretty cushy, if you ask me. Field Marshal, another famous one, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who established pretty much all of the operation plans for Hitler's successful campaign in the West, and he also commanded the 11th Army. You also had Field Marshal Paul Ludwig Edvald von Kleist. They had amazing names, didn't they? Who was involved in the Battle of Paris and was in charge of Army Group A. But yeah, so there you go. They had quite a lot of high-profile prisoners in there, and most of them were repatriated. Those who hadn't committed serious war crimes were, because some of them did, so that were repatriated to Germany in 1948, and that is when the camp was finally closed. And in 2016, they did a bit of an archaeological dig on the camp, and they actually found that the escape tunnel was pretty much intact. I wonder if that's a testament to German engineering. They found the tunnel was in relatively good condition, and all the wooden supporting was still there. So there you go. Those are some recent historical anniversaries. I just love looking at stuff like that, so I thought I'd share it with you. I'll have another look at comments. Sorry, I must have made a boo-boo. I see William Shaw's comment. British Royal Employment. I must have made a mistake there. Sorry if I did. Yeah, the Isle of Man camps did seem pretty rough, didn't they? I think this is because this camp was designed to house very high-ranking, top echelon German military staff. Does sound like another film idea, doesn't it? Actually. So I'm just laughing at comments. Ooh, you never know, William. Certainly worth having a look. Right, so what was next on my list of things to discuss? That was it, right. So, how are we all keeping busy? I have been, as I said last week, I've been trying to do a little bit of exercise in my flat. I've dug my rowing machine out, but getting that out the cupboard was probably enough exercise for this week. I've been trying to play guitar a little bit, but I am also focusing on quite a number of family history tasks. And there are many you can do yourself. So I thought I'd tell you about some of the things I have been looking to do myself. And also, actually, if you are looking for more kind of ideas, a very good place to check out is our friends over at Who Do You Think You Are magazine. Fantastic publication. If you don't have a subscription to the magazine, they have a lot of free content up on their site. And they are doing a lot around coronavirus and how to use family history as a way of doing something worthwhile to keep yourself busy while we are all stuck indoors. And one of the ideas they had, which is um, something I've kind of adapted from my ancestors, they were saying, why don't you write your own memoirs? But one of the things I've been doing is basically writing little stories on my favourite ancestors. So, I mean, I'm sure we've all got them. I've got about 4 or 5 in my tree who I find particularly fascinating. And if there was a dinner party with your ancestors, they're the 5 I'd invite. And what I've actually been doing, because I'm probably my family's family historian. I don't think any of my relatives are doing it, but they're all interested, and they're always asking me, "Oh, share with me what you've done. Share with me what you've done." And I can't really just share them at JedCon because they wouldn't really know what they were looking at. I think, and I think they get confused, and also it doesn't. There's facts in there, but I really wanted to share the stories in a way that I'd enjoy reading them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I've basically started writing ancestor profiles, little biographies of them. Most of them seem to be about 2-3 pages in length, going over every single little piece of information I've found out about them, but writing it in a way, not note form, actually writing it like a little story. And I've been having great fun with that. It's reminding me of discoveries I'd made previously. It's encouraging me to rethink events and kind of imagine them in my head a little bit more. But yeah, that's something that I have been finding very, very enjoyable. Another fantastic suggestion, who do you think you are, had, and this is something we're planning on doing with my wife's grandmother, is recording family memories. So you may be separated from relatives at the moment, but of course, you don't need to be in the same room to communicate with them. I know quite a lot of people who've been giving their older relatives iPads so they can FaceTime or Skype or stay in touch that way. But one of the great things about Skype is that Skype calls can actually be recorded and preserved for the future. And there are loads of other apps you can use for that as well. Maybe have a quick Google and see what's out there. But yeah, one of the things we're going to do next week is we're going to Skype my wife's grandma. Sadly, all my grandparents are no longer around, but I did do this with my grandfather before he died. And it was something I was very, very pleased I did, because now I've got that forever. And I enjoy watching it sometimes when I'm thinking of him, because we were very close and I do miss him dearly. But so yeah, we've written a list of questions. She had a very interesting life. She grew up in Berlin. Her parents were Dutch. Her dad was a businessman who was based in Berlin, and they ended up having to flee for obvious reasons once the situation in Germany got a little bit worse. And then sadly, she was separated from her dad because she went over to a boarding school in England, and her dad ended up going over to the United States. And they were split up for the rest of the war. But yeah, she's got all these fantastic memories about, bumping into Marley and Dietrich in the block of flats she grew up when she was a little girl, being chased out of a Berlin cafe once because Hitler came on the radio, and she said to her daddy, she said to her dad in Dutch, "Why is that angry man shouting so much?" And they basically got chased out the cafe. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be getting it on Skype and recording all of her memories. So that is another thing you could do if you haven't done that yet. Other things you could do is tidy up your research, basically review it, go through everything you've done already, fact check, triple check. I mean, it's not the most thrilling activity, but it's important. Mistakes in family history have a habit of continuing. If you make a fundamental error and keep going further back, you can end up with a terrible tangle for yourself to try and work out. But the other ones I wanted to tell you about, apart from connecting with other genealogists, staying in touch, tuning into our community activities and helping each other out and talking a lot, is helping transcribe records. A lot of record transcription could not be done without volunteers. Miko himself is actually currently looking for volunteers to help him transcribe records. And if you would like to get involved, I reckon the best way of probably doing it is sending us a private message on Facebook expressing your interest, and then we can put you in touch with Miko, or dropping an email to our customer support team at support@findmypast.com, and they will put you in touch. It's quite a fun thing to do. I've done it a bit myself. I quite enjoy doing it, and it really is worthwhile because you're helping bring more records online, helping more people make discoveries, and also preserving this information for future generations. On the subject of transcription, Another thing that I've been doing is I've been attempting to brush up on my paleography skills. That's probably one of my biggest things I think I need to improve on in my research. Paleography is basically deciphering the old handwriting that you see in records. And anybody who's viewed an image from particularly pre-19th century will know that sometimes deciphering what's actually on that page is far, far from easy. So the National Archives actually do a good little online course on this, and I've been having a play around with it at the moment, and it's really, really interesting. And I've already found things that are really helping. I mean, simple things like looking for standard phrases. So say you're looking at a specific type of document, whether it's a military record or something, there are phrases that the officers filling in those forms will repeat again and again and again and again and again, and that means they're easily identifiable. And in those phrases are characters, individual characters, which give you a sense of, so you know what a word is, but the word some of the things might look a little bit different. Um, you can compare other letters that in words that you can't decipher to letters in words that you've already identified and kind of build the word around that, almost like playing hangman's bluff, if that makes sense. Because basically, the human brain is a strange thing. The human mind, when we read, obviously we don't read every letter individually. Words form almost automatically. Our brain does that without us thinking. And while you're reading, that's very, very helpful, because obviously reading every letter individually would be a nightmare. And I mean, imagine how long it would take you to get through something like War and Peace if you were reading like that. But it's not particularly useful when you're doing genealogy. Confirmation bias sometimes will lead you to, as you're skimming over old documents, you'll think you've read a word correctly, but actually it might mean something completely different. Um, Another one is keeping in mind spelling variations over time. Um, English spelling wasn't really standardized until the 18th century. So when you're looking at documents from the 16th and 17th, you may words you may find a lot of words that are actually spelled phonetically, like as they sound, or they might actually be spelled out in their own regional dialects, which can make things very, very difficult. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that too much because, as I said, the National Archives does do a very good little online brush up course on it. So sadly, I can't post links in the comments while I'm talking live. But check it out. And another one. William Shaw has highlighted another great one. That you could do a degree at the University of Strathclyde, who do a very well respected and highly regarded course in genealogy, and I believe they also do a free 6-week course called Researching Your Family Tree, and that will only be available until the 3rd of May. So if you want to do that, get in fast. And Elsa's just provided. Hi, Elsa. Lovely to see you. Elsa's just provided a great example. Like pre-1858 wills begin with the phrase, "In the name of God, Amen." It always helps you get your iron. Yeah, perfect example. So yeah, another thing you could do. This is something that I spotted the other day. Again, it was news I found. Read it while perusing Who Do You Think You Are magazine. Was helping. This is a cool initiative. Something I wasn't aware of. Helping the Museum of Ordinary People document people's experiences of the coronavirus. I hadn't heard of the Museum of Ordinary People before, actually. On Twitter, they're on Twitter. I think they're on other social media platforms as well. But if you're looking for them on Twitter, they're using the hashtag these times. So the Museum of the Public, or MOOP, it's a great acronym, that, isn't it? They're based in Brighton, and they describe themselves as a new kind of museum that tells the stories of ordinary people, exploring and considering the magic and mundanity of ordinary life. And I think that's pretty much what we do as family historians. There's a real overlap between what we're doing and what they're doing. And yeah, at the moment, they're inviting members of the public to help them document this, because we are living through some really unprecedented, strange times. I do think that people will probably look back on this and think, "Wow, that was dramatic, wasn't it?" So yeah, get involved. As I said, you can find them on social media by tagging @Museum Ordinary. or the hashtag these times, and they're also on Facebook and Instagram. So check them out and help make history. There you go. How's that for a call to action? Brilliant. So let's have a quick look at some comments. Thanks, William, for clarifying that. And thank you, Karen. You're a hero, saving the paleography course. It's really, really interesting. William, I think that museum is in Brighton, but they do have a presence on social media as well. Kim's doing a diary for them. Cool. So some of you are already getting involved. I've just seen Diane. Oh, sorry to hear that, Diane. Feel free to pop your query in here again. I might take another look at it, and someone else watching might be able to take a look. And Sylvia also is writing a journal about what's happening. It started with an intro about me and apologise for handwriting. Genealogy skills for the future. Indeed, I like that. Right, so may leave loose women research for this week because I think what's more interesting is looking at the historical parallels. Of course, as I said, we are living through rather unprecedented times at the moment, but of course, nothing. I think Herodotus or someone like that said, nothing's truly new. Some Greek historian, some pearl of ancient wisdom, and I do think that's true. And of course, this is not the first pandemic that the world has faced. Various generations of our ancestors lived through their own. Some, let's just say, a fair degree worse than this. But there's these records of pandemics go back a long way, all the way back to 541 CE, with the plague of Justinian, which arrived in Constantinople, which was the capital of the Byzantine Empire back in the day. And it decimated Constantinople. It spread like wildfire across Europe, Asia, North Africa, Arabia. They reckon it killed around 30 to 50 million people, perhaps half the world's population. And it definitely played a significant role in the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. Of course, one we all know, the Black Death, 1347, when it arrived in Europe, and that was when quarantine was actually invented. That's when I don't think it was necessarily self-isolation. That was when nailing people into their houses as a means of controlling the spread was employed. And obviously, there's a huge, fascinating history behind that, which you can surely look into your own leisure. But one of the ones I found quite interesting, something that people don't seem to remember so much, is the cholera epidemics. Cholera was a huge scourge in the 19th century, tore through England in the early to mid 19th century. Had huge impact, and at the time, people had no idea what it was. The prevailing theory was that it was spread by foul air known as miasma. But then a very, very intelligent and pioneering man by the name of John Snow, not the King of the North. Instead, he was a British doctor. He was a genius. He was one of the first people to suspect that the disease actually was lurking in London's drinking water. So Snow basically acted a bit like Sherlock Holmes. He started investigating hospital records, morgue reports, trying his best to track down the precise locations of these outbreaks. And very forward-thinking, he created these big geographic charts over a 10-day period. It's quite a famous story, so you might have heard it already. And basically found a cluster of 500 infections surrounding the Broad Street pump. Very well known, popular city well. And he said in his own words, as soon as I became acquainted with the situation and extent of this eruption of cholera, I suspected some contamination of the water of the much frequented Pump Street and Broad Street. So with dogged effort, not many people believed him at first. He was able to convince the local officials to remove the pump. I mean, it was relied on by a lot of people. Not the pump itself, sorry, remove the handle. Rendering it unusable. And like magic, the infections completely dried up. His work didn't cure cholera overnight, but it did lead to a global effort to improve urban sanitation and protect water from protect drinking water from contamination. Anyway, and there was also some very forward-thinking scientists and physicians in Germany at the charity hospital. I think it was a guy called Koch who was that tuberculosis? I'm not sure, but yeah, they played a role too. But no, the one thing I wanted to talk about quickly before I went was obviously one of the obvious parallels to the situation we now find ourselves facing is probably the restrictions that were placed on the public during the Second World War. The famous "keeping calm and carry on" posters. That's something that people apparently the sale of "keep calm and carry on" posters has climbed dramatically since the spread of the virus, which is hardly surprising. It's iconic and a fantastic message. And yeah, so there are parallels there, and obviously while there was real Blitz spirit, I mean, I've seen some people say, like, oh, we've lost our way a bit since then. People wouldn't have acted like this in the 30s and 40s. Propaganda is a powerful thing. Not While everybody did largely pull together, of course they did. The Blitz spirit was very, very real, and it's celebrated for a reason. Not everybody towed the line. One of the things I found that was actually quite surprising was that despite the Blitz and the Blitz spirit and all the volunteer work people were pouring out to do, crime actually rose from about 303,000 offences in 1939 up to just under 500,000 in 1945. I just thought that was fascinating. But why was that? Well, there are loads of different reasons. One of the things that was quite common was looting, particularly after heavy air raids. Lots of frequent bombing raids devastated very developed areas. Many shops, many department stores were completely bombed out, and it was actually quite common for bombed and abandoned buildings to be a popular target for looters. Of course, they were treasure troves. So examples you can find in records: after a raid in Dover, one man returned home to find that his entire house had been stripped. Even the carpets and the pipes had been taken by the less than honest members of his community. And some really daring thieves even did looting while air raids were on. At the height of one of the worst air raids in Coventry in November 1940, two men were actually caught ransacking a wine cellars. And I love this. If you look at it up in the newspapers, you can find the judges. Newspapers are great. I don't need to remind you of that. But you can actually find the judge's comments, and he said, "I cannot think of conduct more detestable than that. During the most dreadful air raid which has ever taken place, you should be found looting." And he gave them 6 and 7 years respectively, which was quite a severe sentence. There were other examples of that, but that wasn't the other one. Another thing that went up as well, which is quite surprising, was juvenile delinquency. More than three. Obviously, there was evacuation. More than 3.5 million people were moved from high-risk cities to the safer countryside, which is just a great example of kind of people putting their heads together and getting a job done. The logistical feat was incredible. But this was actually the combination of the boredom these youths faced when they were shipped away from their parents and their communities to, in some cases, the middle of nowhere, and the lack of the parental control they probably would have received at home, was blamed by a lot of was actually blamed by the official police review for a steep rise in juvenile delinquency in 1939. So there's a quote I've got here which says, "In some parts of the country, gangs of young hooligans are appearing partly because the restrictions on the movement have left no alternative but the streets as leisure time resorts." So in 1939 you had 52,000 people under the age of 17 appearing before magistrates, but 2 years later that had gone up to 72,000. So there was quite an increase. In Bath, an 11-year-old London evacuee was sent to a remand home for a week after admitting that he stole money from his foster mother. You've also got examples that there was a 10-year-old evacuees who were fined for breaking flower pots and causing damage in the city's Henrietta Park. There was a 13-year-old boy in Ipswich who was given 6 strokes. He wouldn't be sentenced to that now. In 1939, after stealing food parcels that were intended for evacuated children, but my favourite story, which shows that boys will always be boys, was that in 1949, two boys broke into a bombed-out house that had been converted into a munitions store. And what did they steal? They stole enough anti-tank bombs to blow up themselves and their families, the Birmingham Mail reported. Thankfully, they were caught before disaster occurred. But yeah, so it wasn't just juvenile delinquency and looting. Obviously, many people did disobey blackout breaches. I guess you could say that's a lot of historical parallels to people ignoring some of the advice that would be given now. Obviously, during hours of darkness, all street lights had to be switched off, and people were encouraged as well to darken their homes to avoid giving the loved ones targets to hit. But this did have the unfortunate effect of also providing cover for all manner of nefarious deeds. But a lot of the reasons, one of the things you see people hauled before magistrates for incredibly frequently is simply ignoring the blackout rules, having lights on. You had people who would specifically patrol and catch people with this, and fines were quite serious. But yeah, many orders of the government were actually ignored. So they, for example, compulsory work orders were made and anyone failing to do their bit could be dragged up in court, and this did happen. So like there was an engine tester in Coventry who was sentenced to 3 months hard labour in 1943 after he took 10 days took 10 days off without permission when he got married. So you have a bit of sympathy in there, wanting to enjoy a honeymoon, but there was a war on. So he didn't get to spend much time with his wife after that because he was given 3 months hard labour. There were also 2 women from Kings Norton in Birmingham who were fined in 1943 for refusing to do war work. Both said they were conscientious objectors and their services were not at the disposal of the government. Also said, you can't outlaw. One said she could not outlaw war with her left hand and help in its successful prosecution in the other, but they were still charged. So you've also got examples like people being fined for being late to work. So there was a guy, a 20-year-old apprentice driller in South Tyneside who was always annoying the magistrates, and they finally gave up and charged him when he turned up for work late 33 times in 41 days. That is pretty bad, actually, isn't it? And he was charged under the essential work order. And the chairman of the bench told him that the best place for him would be the army so he could get discipline. But it wasn't just people breaking orders themselves. People could be punished for helping others break orders. So there was a woman in Norfolk who was caught hiding an absentee soldier in her cupboard in 1941. There was a farmer in Darlington. It was fined about £1,000 in 1942, which was a lot back then, for failing to grow 2 acres of potatoes as ordered by the Ministry of Agriculture. So yeah, loads of different ways, and people also did play the system. Some opportunists worked out ways to earn money from free and crowded public air raid shelters. They'd charge people for places, using their lackeys to hold spots until payments had been made, which was obviously despicable behaviour. Others abused government compensation schemes and tried to claim money they weren't entitled to. One man was jailed for 3 years after claiming to have lost his home 19 times in a 3-month period. Cheeky boy. And on each occasion, he received at least £500 compensation. So he made bank. He did all right out of that. And of course, after the introduction of conscription, some doctors did break the law by agreeing to make patients unfit for military service. Sometimes they do this for friends, family, or loved ones. Sometimes it would be for financial award. But yeah, so there you go. There were many examples. And the reason I wanted to talk about that was, of course, obviously the Blitz spirit was a real thing. The nation's response to the Second World War was incredible. Everybody did pull together. It was fantastic. But sometimes there is a tendency to look back on things through rose-tinted lenses. And what I'm saying is people weren't perfect back then. No one ever is. People make mistakes. And history repeats itself, as you can see. So I think I will have a look at some more comments. Yeah, Alice is saying, always find moving the story of the men of Eyam, the villagers of Eyam. So I say that because there is actually a record set on Findmypast. Let me see if I can find it. Findmypast, Eyam. Yeah, if you go to our collection of Derbyshire registers and records, you can find there's a book in there called The Brave Men of Eyam, 1665 to 1666, which tells the story that Elsa just shared then. A brave community who, got when they voluntarily isolated themselves um, in 1665, they basically did completely prevent further spread in that area. So it was a huge sacrifice they paid, and it was very, very moving. And seriously, there was a BBC play in the 1970s. Oh, I'm gonna have to see if I can find that somewhere. Oh, thanks, Diane. Diane has shared the name of her ancestor, Royal Naval Reserves, number 6429. If anyone can help Diane track that down, that would be fantastic. I'll have a look. And if you tune in next week, Diane, who knows, someone may have found something. Oh, brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. Sylvia's kindly shared the link. I'm going to watch that. Yeah. Oh, wow. Kim said, my granddad went AWOL when my auntie was born in 1944. He had a good reason. And military police turned up on my grandma's doorstep to take him back. Yeah, I think I'll have to say goodbye too. Oh, happy birthday for tomorrow, Diane. I hope you're able to enjoy it. And I think, oh, and happy birthday to Sylvia as well. Many, 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 many happy returns. I hope you're able to have a good one. And Dave, my pal Dave, said one of my great uncles was arrested at least 3 times for causing a crowd to gather. It's so funny, isn't it, how our ancestors' experiences often do mirror our own. I love the way that history really does repeat itself. Nothing is new. I'm going to have to find out who said that because it's a very good quote. For causing a crowd together, I would guess it was drunken arguments outside pubs. His last arrest was for burning a mattress after a blackout. Yeah, I remember you think you told this when we were talking about the 1939 register at Roots Tech. It took 4 policemen to get him in the van. Oh, and he died of a heart attack. That's very sad. The police said his weapon of choice was his wooden leg. Wow. He I thought I'd broken face, but then right, I'm gonna let you go. If people are just tuning in for the foreseeable future, these are going to be at 4 p.m. not 5, so we don't clash with the official coronavirus updates. But yeah, I will bid you all a fond farewell. Stay safe. Remain indoors. Stay in touch, and yeah, please do participate in the stuff we've got going on in the week. Let's stay together. Help us stay connected. So bye everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for commenting. And I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Bye now.